Sound Cartel. Is your business prepared for mounting cash flow pressures? And are the conversations you're avoiding making things worse? In this week's episode, Nadine Connell, founder of commercial finance brokerage Smart Business Plans, explains why many profitable businesses are being squeezed by changing cash flow timing. Nadine also shares practical steps to strengthen financial resilience before small pressures become major problems. Then communication and human skills expert Leah Mether explores why leaders often avoid difficult communications and why addressing issues early is one of the kindest and most effective things a leader can do. From Sound Cartel, I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist, and this is Business Essentials. Strain around cash flow tends to build not from a single issue, but rather from a combination of smaller pressures arriving at the same time. Rising costs, slower revenue, and changes to how often businesses need to meet their financial obligations are all reshaping how money moves through Australian small and medium businesses. Nadine Connell is a commercial finance specialist and founder of brokerage Smart Business Plans. What she's seeing is that businesses aren't necessarily struggling because they're unprofitable, but because the timing of cash in and cash out is shifting beneath them. So what are the key pressures converging right now, putting cash flow under strain for so many businesses? Nadine starts by explaining to Nicole Goodman.
It's actually really quite interesting because a lot of the pressures that the small businesses are under is for things outside of their control. Interest rates are rising again and again and again. There's, fuel prices increased, which is actually putting a lot of pressure on not just people or businesses in the logistics or the transport industry, but they're passing on those additional costs from their operating businesses onto customers. So it's kind of creating this little bit of a perfect storm. There's obviously the Iranian war. There's discussions around trust taxation and CTG. And so there's a lot of things that are resulting in small businesses kind of like trying to tighten their belts and manage that cash flow because it's things they can't control.
You've also said that the real issue for many businesses isn't really the cost itself, but rather timing of when cash leaves the business. Can you talk a bit about why that's so critical?
Yeah. Like if you actually look at the profit and loss of a business over the year, because it's annualized, you'll see income looks great, there's profit at the end of the day, but it doesn't actually tell you the whole picture. A lot of businesses have massive seasonality. As a client of mine who works at a hospitality place in Thredbo, all of their income comes in the winter months and it's a lot slower in the summer months. And so there needs to be a lot of kind of thought around how they manage the cash flow when there's all this and can be inconsistent or seasonality when it comes down to, the type of businesses that they have.
Can you walk us through how more frequent obligations, like paying super with each pay cycle, can change the way a business manages its cash day to day?
Yeah, that's a really great example, the changes to the super. Previously, employers always have to pay super, but it used to be on a quarterly basis. And now when it comes down to a pay cycle, that pay cycle can be really different depending on the type of business, with a lot of employees that are on casual or part-time or full-time, and there's weekly or fortnightly or monthly pay cycles, then that's going to actually quite impact the way that businesses, particularly smaller businesses, have to have access to that cash on an ongoing basis. And that can be tough when income might come in a little bit more periodically or not as often, but they've still got to continue to pay.
So how can a business owner tell if their business is relying on timing gaps in cash flow rather than being genuinely financially stable?
Yeah, they need to think about almost like a stress test. If you kind of like are looking at your books, and I think it's really, really, really important for business owners to understand what their P&L looks like, how they actually look at those numbers. They need to be literate in that area and not just rely on accountants and bookkeepers, because then they can see where the seasonality is, where the analysis is. Because if you can't kind of like manage for 2 weeks and you're struggling to make those bills pay, that's when you're going to have defaults on loans or not be able to pay suppliers, and that's where things get tricky for them.
For those listening now, what are the most important steps they should be taking to strengthen their cash flow and avoid getting caught out?
I think, and we started talking about things that are outside of their control. I think it's control what you can and really do have a look at Address everything that is going out of your business. Rethink about how maybe you're charging customers. Maybe you have deposits or payment cycles rather than just, the fee at the end of the service, depending on what kind of industry that you're in. Align your income to your supplier payments so that you can have, more smooth cash flow when it comes to that. Revisit trading terms, revisit things like electricity and gas, every now and again, try to get those extras that you don't need to fork out. Get on top of it early and keep on top of it.
And Nadine, as we wrap up, as business owners are bearing down for the crunch that's coming that they feel that they're in, what would your advice be to them as they consider finances that they might feel are out of their control?
I think that being proactive about the now and the possible future and not putting your head in the sand, making changes now that can help you. If you know seasonality is going to be a problem, if you know fuel prices are going to go up and they're going to affect your business, starting to make some changes now. I think we all learned from COVID that you need to be able to pivot. Business owners need to be able to pivot and they need to be able to think outside the box. And I would suggest to start doing that now so that you can weather the storm.
That was Nadine Connell, commercial finance expert and founder of Smart Business Plans.
If you're building a business, your reputation is everything, and a podcast can help build trust at scale and turn your expertise into authority. Sound Cartel's new Thought Leader package is designed for business owners who want impact without the overwhelm. So we handle the strategy, production and launch while you can stay focused on what you do best. You can book your free 20-minute strategy call at soundcartel.com.au.
Now to difficult conversations in the workplace. Managing a business isn't just about balancing the books, it's also about having the conversations that keep your team performing at its best, even when those conversations can feel uncomfortable. Communication and human skills expert Leah Mether says avoiding difficult conversations can quietly damage culture, accountability and performance. She joins me to explain why leaders need to stop aiming to be nice and start focusing on being kind instead. Leah starts by explaining why so many leaders avoid hard conversations, even when they know they probably shouldn't.
Yeah, there's a few key themes I hear from people when we talk about this. And this is actually a question that I ask leaders directly. I will say, what holds you back from having these challenging conversations? Most common responses, fear. And that can be fear of conflict and confrontation. It can be fear of how the other person might react. That is one that often comes up. How it might impact the relationship or repercussions. Perhaps they're worried about being labelled as a bully or, having some blowback for them if they raise it. The other one is people pleasing. A lot of leaders out there or business owners, even staff within teams, people want other people to like them. And they mistakenly think that if they avoid challenging conversations, then people will like us. But of course, one of the hardest lessons in life is some people just won't like you, no matter how lovely and friendly and conflict avoidant you are. So the people pleasers don't want to damage relationships. They hope things will magically get better on their own. If they do it again, I'll address it. The other reason I see leaders avoid hard conversations is a lack of skills. They actually don't know where to start. There are a lot of leaders out there who they know the theory. They know that getting in early is a better approach. They get it intellectually, but they have never been equipped with the fundamental communication, leadership and human skills of how to actually do this stuff. And that's why I'm so passionate about talking about it and teaching it, because this is a skill set like any other technical skill set that can be learned, improved and developed.
Now, Leah, you've said psychological safety is often misunderstood. How does that misunderstanding lead to avoiding accountability?
Yeah, so psychological safety is so important. When you have psychological safety within a team, you feel safe to speak up and be heard, contribute, ask questions without fear of being blamed, shamed, humiliated, torn down. So really important, the number one predictor of a high-performing team according to Google, and there's a very famous study they did on that called Project Aristotle. The problem we're seeing is that people are confusing what psychological safety actually means, and in particular, they are confusing safety with being comfortable, or the concept of being unsafe with being uncomfortable. So what's happening as a result is you're seeing people get feedback that makes them feel a bit uncomfortable, and they're saying, I don't feel safe. They are different things. Sometimes getting feedback you don't like, it's delivered well, you are in a safe environment. It's not easy to hear. It's not fun when you get told that your performance is not up to scratch, but that doesn't mean it's unsafe. Now, because some people are behaving in this way and using terms like, oh, I don't feel safe, leaders are then getting apprehensive about having hard conversations from fear of being labelled a bully. They know that there is now legislation around, psychosocial hazards and the like. So this confusion about what it actually is and isn't means that some leaders are avoiding the conversation altogether. I want to stress this. When you have real psychological safety within a team, it actually aids accountability because you are having challenging conversations early. You're making expectations clear. If someone's performance isn't up to scratch, you're addressing that and you're doing it in a way that isn't blaming, shaming. It's not humiliating them. It's not attacking the person. It is feedback to genuinely help them improve. It can still be uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe. This misunderstanding, though, is really having an impact in many businesses. And I just urge everyone listening to make sure that you really do understand what it is and make sure your people understand the difference between feeling unsafe and uncomfortable. It's a great little activity to do with a team, to ask the team, what do we think that difference is, and make sure that you have alignment there.
Not meaning to put you on the spot, but is there a kind of simple definition or, I suppose, way you could outline the difference between unsafe versus just uncomfortable?
There is. What I would really urge leaders to explore it with a team, though, rather than it being saying this is what it is. I would explore it as a team. There are definitions out there in terms of that Amy Edmondson, who is seen as, the thought leader who really popularised the term psychological safety. If you look at the definitions she uses, she really is clear that it is about feeling safe to speak up, be heard, to contribute without that fear of being blamed, shamed, torn down. So if you think about it, feeling safe to speak up, that also means feeling safe to give feedback, to have hard conversations without, being labelled a bully. Now, it does require, though, that we all up our communication game. To create psychological safety, you need to be able to get curious. You need to be able to give and receive feedback well. If someone asks a question, you don't say to them, well, Grace, that's a stupid question. Why on earth did you ask that question? Seriously, how long have you worked here? If that's how I respond when you ask a question, well, that is not safe. That makes you think, and that's the last time I ask Leah a question. Next time she says, any questions, I'm going to say nothing, even though I've got questions. So it is really important to understand the difference and, crucially, to explore it within your team, within your context. What does that difference look like? Because different businesses and industries will have some different nuance there.
All right, moving on, I wonder if you could outline for me what are the warning signs in a team that difficult conversations aren't happening but need to?
So one thing to look out for is triangles are forming. And when I say triangles are forming, I'm drawing on the great work of Rachel Robertson, who talks about this concept of, for a great team, you need no triangles because people are having direct conversations rather than creating a triangle by talking with a third person rather than actually having the conversation with the person who it's about or intended for. So things to watch out for are if there's a lot of gossip behind people's backs, if there are meetings after the meetings, but not to a person's face, if everyone knows what the problem is or where it lies, but no one's actually talking about that publicly, chances are there's conversations that are being avoided. And also if poor behaviour and performance are just being green lit, if they're continuing, if they're escalating. The definition of culture I use in the work I do with teams is culture is the behaviours that are supported, rewarded, tolerated, and make people feel included. Now, that word tolerated is absolutely key. The culture you end up with is the worst behaviour you tolerate. So if you are tolerating poor behaviour in your team or in your workplace, chances are there are conversations that are not being had.
All right, last question for you, Leah. What is one mindset shift that helps leaders see hard conversations as an opportunity rather than a risk?
Yeah, I again would draw here on the work of another fabulous thought leader in Brené Brown and really drill home the point that clear is kind. We need to understand the difference between nice and kind. A lot of us focus on being nice. And when we focus on being nice, we think, oh, we should all just get along and I want people to like me and it's all about harmony. I just want it all to be smooth sailing. That's dangerous because when your focus is just on being nice, what happens is all of the problems go under the carpet. We don't have the hard conversations and problems escalate. So the mindset shift here is understanding that as a leader, it's not about being nice. It is about being kind. Now, when you put the kind label on it and ask yourself, what is the kindest thing I can do here? That will usually help you see quite quickly that having a challenging conversation early is the kindest thing you can do. For example, if someone's performance or behavior is not up to scratch, me not giving them that feedback and just holding on to it so that it continues and maybe it escalates and they end up getting a warning or performance managed, that's actually really cruel. The kindest thing I could do is give you that feedback early in a really compassionate way where I'm trying to help you improve, but I'm going to get in early and have that conversation. That is the kindest thing for me to do for the person who's not behaving well, but it's also the kindest thing for me to do for the rest of the team who's experiencing that poor behavior or that poor performance. So make that shift from focusing on being nice to kind and ask that question of what is the kindest thing I can do here. The one other little addition I would make here is if you are a leader listening and you hate conflict and confrontation, and that's what leads you to avoid difficult or challenging conversations. Avoiding the elephant does not make it disappear. It only makes it grow in size. So it sounds counterintuitive, but if you want to minimize conflict in your workplace, and you'll never get rid of it because conflict is part of life, but if you want to minimize conflict and reduce your need to have difficult conversations, my top tip to you is this: get good at having uncomfortable conversations early. Nip issues in the bud. Don't wait for them to grow. And that is the best mindset shift to help you get in early when you realize that that is how to avoid those harder conversations later on.
That was communication and human skills expert Leah Mether. Thanks for joining us for this week's episode. Follow Business Essentials Podcast across social media and head to businessessentialspodcast.au for more. Business Essentials is a Sound Cartel podcast. Producers are Nick Schillberger, Nicole Goodman and myself. Technical production is by Pete Letts. I'm Grace Jennings-Edquist. Thanks for listening. We'll bring you more business essentials next week.
Sound Cartel.